series produced by the UF Thomson Earth Systems Institute, Scientist in Every Florida School program, and the Community Scholars Initiative. Each Friday at 3 p.m. for 30 minutes, a scientist will present on their area of expertise, followed by a question and answer session. Scientist in Every Florida School is a free program housed within the Thomson Earth Systems Institute at the University of Florida. The CEFS program connects and builds long-term partnerships between teachers and scientists in order to bring current scientific research and big data into classrooms in Florida and beyond. The Community Scholars Initiative is based at Valencia College in Orlando, Florida. Our goal is to connect, create, and elevate educational experiences in the classroom and our community. Supported by the Lake Nona community, we facilitate programs in both Orange and Osceola County schools and work with community leaders and businesses to build out-of-school learning programs. During the COVID-19 school closures, we are happy to partner with CEFS to continue engaging with our students, teachers, and parents in a digital platform. Today, we are joined by Dr. Anthony Pivarunas. He is a geoscientist who focuses on paleomagnetism, numerical methods, geochronology, and field geology. A lot of his research involves the extraction of magnetic data from rocks, which provide information about the ancient magnetic field on Earth, the positioning of continents, and major Earth history events. He's currently a visiting assistant professor at the University of Florida. He received his Ph.D. at UF in 2019, and he received his undergraduate degree in geophysics from the State University of New York College at Geneseo, I'm hoping I pronounced that right, in 2015. So as Tony tells you about his work, please add your questions for him in the chat box. One of our moderators will ask your questions. We will also be adding an email address to the chat box for Tony to identify a rock in your collection. So send us a photo if you have a rock you want to know what it is. And without further ado, I will hand it over to you.
Hi, so I'm Tony, and I'm a geologist, geoscientist. I look at Earth and try to study it. So what exactly do I do? What's kind of the specifics? And if you could switch the slide. So one thing I do is I use power drills to take little cores out of rocks like this. So I have a bunch of them. So I have some old ones at home. And so in this video, which I think Brian can start now, so I'm in India here using a modified chainsaw with a diamond tip drill bit to take out these little plugs of rock. It's being videoed by my old advisor, now colleague, Dr. Joe Meert, also at the University of Florida. And the person pumping the water to cool off the rock as I take out these little cores is Scott Miller, PhD candidate in our group. And so then you can see kind of so you can see the water coming out of the hole. It gets really hot as the bit spins around and wears out the diamonds are really hard, so they enable us to take these little chunks out. And so, and then that's kind of what it looks like after I'm done. So we take some, you can see these little holes. So if you're ever along the side of the road, maybe in the southwestern US or in some area, and you see these tiny little holes, like little human woodpecker holes, that's probably some paleomagnetist somewhere. And so next slide. And so, one thing I get to do, which I really enjoy in geology, I get to play with friends outside. And so these are some of our colleagues who in India. So a lot of my work gets done in India. And so I couldn't really be done without Manoj and Anoop. And you see Scott again back here and then Joe there. So one thing I really like about geology is kind of that opportunity to travel to interesting places and look at interesting questions about Earth history. Next slide. And so today specifically, one thing geologists do among a number of different things. So geology isn't just looking, some people might think geology is looking just at rocks as kind of old dusty rocks, but geologists look at a number of different aspects of the Earth. Geoscientists look at water, they look at climate, and indeed rocks too. And so we see some UF students looking at rocks in Texas here, and those rocks are made up of different minerals. And so in this, so I've got a couple of rocks, and you guys probably have some pictures of rocks to show me, but rocks are made up of different minerals. So here we have, in this very nice illustration, we have the different forms of the mineral garnet. So you see that minerals can have different color, that the same mineral, garnet, can have different colors depending on what chemical elements are in it. And so if rocks are kind of a book that we want to read to understand the history of the earth, the minerals are the pages in that book that make it up and allow us to get information out of it. Next slide. And so this is a map from the United States Geological Survey. So this is a federal government agency that examines geological questions in the United States. And so what these different colors are is these represent the different rocks that the different bedrock that exists in all of the different areas of the United States. So you can see that up here in Florida, we have, where we are in Florida, you can see there's these yellow rocks, which if you look at that scale on the side, it goes from old rocks to young rocks. So Florida is all relatively young rocks, and these are young limestones and sands and other terrestrial deposits. But you can see that the different areas of the United States, if you think of the West as being very mountainous, you can see that these mountains are made up of a variety of different rocks throughout in the Western US. And we could spend hours and hours I could spend hours and hours talking about this map, but I think, and you can see the Appalachians here, that kind of the twisty bands of color. Those are the Appalachian Mountains. And then you can see how the Mississippi River has cut into the rocks here. So looking at the rocks in the United States, and you can do this around the world too, it tells you about how land changes and why continents look the way they do. And I just find that incredibly fascinating. And that's and just answering questions about why the Earth is the way it is kind of really exciting to me. And I think I have one more slide. And this is just so geologists use, I won't go into all of the different names here, but this is just the geologic time scale. So this is from 4.6 billion years at the beginning of Earth history, all the way to through the Paleozoic, Mesozoic, and now Florida, those yellow rocks are rocks from the Cenozoic. So most of what you're seeing in Florida is at the recent period of Earth history. So recent, and so Cenozoic means recent life, and so most of Florida, where we are, is kind of more younger rocks. And that's about it. I just I'm happy to be here and excited to take your questions about geology.
Tony, thank you so much. Before we jump into the questions, and while our attendees are writing their questions in the chat box on the side there, we would love to quiz you just a little bit. We're very excited because some of our attendees sent us rocks early in the hopes that you would help them identify which those are. So today we're going to start with Stephanie, who's in 3rd grade. She sent us 4 pictures, hoping that you would be able to tell her what type of rock this is.
Yeah, so Stephanie, this rock looks like it's, you find these, it's called a type of rock called a concretion. So it's really this kind of compact, layered accumulation of matter of different minerals that generally is kind of cemented together inside of what we call sedimentary rocks. So those are rocks that are made up of little pieces of other rocks that broke apart and then get laid down and eventually squeezed into usually we think of them as these big flat sheets, but inside those sedimentary rocks, we sometimes have these little concretions, some different areas where some material accumulates thanks to water flowing through it and things like that. And sometimes they form around fossils too. So if the remains of some organism gets squeezed into the rock, different microbial activity around it, so little critters trying to eat it, are going to form these kind of concretions as they dispose of that creature.
Perfect. So moving on, Rafa from it was in 5th grade, asks, what is this?
So this looks like, to me, it's I think it looks kind of bluish and or gray, blue grayish. I think this might be a chunk of chert. So you've probably heard of quartz. You've seen big quartz crystals. Well, sometimes quartz forms as these what we call cryptocrystalline. So these very little kind of cryptocrystalline masses that are very hard. And sometimes they're used to make arrowheads or other tools. So a lot of arrowheads are made of chert and scraping tools and things like that. So yeah, that's what I think that is, Rafa.
Awesome. Emma, who's in 4th grade, asks about this one. What do you think this is?
So that's really nice. And we find we've got this little, this cube here that looks kind of strange to have formed naturally, but that cube is actually pyrite. And so that's an iron sulfide. So when you put iron and sulfur together, it forms these little cubes. And you may have heard of pyrite called fool's gold. And so sometimes it forms these really spectacular large cubes. At other times you have to use a microscope or a hand lens to see the cubes, but sometimes it's spectacular like this. And it's probably embedded in some type of slightly altered rock, some type of metamorphosed rock.
Next, we have Mary, who's in 8th grade, is wondering, what do you think this is?
So this one is pretty interesting. So it's kind of got that nice orangey yellow color, orangey red color here, and then this yellowish here. It looks like it has some conchoidal fractures. So it looks like it kind of breaks apart and it doesn't have a really nice crystal form. So that makes me think it could be something like quartz, or maybe some other people were saying it might be something like amber, but I'd have to know a little bit more about it. But it's a really pretty rock.
Perfect. Next, we have Jacob, who's in 7th grade, is wondering, what do you think this one is?
And so this one, I think the giveaway with this one is it's very shiny. And so it looks like it's something that we'd call a mica schist. So it's got these flat sheet-like minerals in it that we call micas. It could be biotite or muscovite. Those are some of the different names for the minerals. And so this forms, these form when the rock gets squeezed and heated up. So these new minerals form. And generally they form in these kind of flat, shiny sheets. And then they make the rock layered. And I actually have an example of a different mica schist here. And you can see how it's kind of catching the light and it's shiny. And so I believe that's what that is from Jacob.
And Jenny, who's in 9th grade, is curious, what do you think this one is?
And so I actually believe I have rocks from the same, at least an area very similar. So that purplish mineral that you can see at some different areas is something called lepidolite. And that's a mica, just like that shiny earlier rock, but it's a mica that contains a lot of lithium. And so that's that purplish mineral is lepidolite. And this is probably, I've been to a place with lepidolite called the Harding pegmatite mine in New Mexico. And so in pegmatites, you get a lot of exotic minerals forming with large crystals. And they're generally very, you can find neat minerals like lepidolite in those pegmatites. So I think that's a pegmatite.
Okay. So now we're going to jump into our Q&A portion of it, and I'm really excited to see all of these questions coming in. So today we are going to start with Bruce, and he asks, what part of the time scale do you study?
So I study the old part of the time scale. So all those, when you looked at the colors, you didn't probably see a lot of them in the map of the United States because all of the older rocks have been covered by younger rocks, but where that time scale was purple and reddish, and that's called the Proterozoic. And that lasted from 2.5 billion to about 542 million years ago. And so it's a very long time, obviously, billions and billions of years. It's almost hard to imagine that amount of time. So I studied so in the Proterozoic, the big land masses that we now know, the continents that we now know, like North America, all little puzzle pieces of them all came together. And so I try to study how that puzzle all fit together in the Proterozoic and how we have the continents we know today, because everything was moving around until they all smashed together into these larger amalgamations. So that's what makes the Proterozoic pretty fascinating to me. Although I do study things at different periods of geologic time as well. A lot of my time is spent there.
Nikita asks, what are the rocks you have found before?
So I found a lot of different rocks depending on where I go. So you saw in the United States, there's kind of, a number of different colors. So in each different area, you can, take a drive. You can drive, to the next town over almost and find different types of rocks. So I found some of the coolest rocks I found is for example, I found this one in Texas. So this is called Lawnite, and it's from Llano, Texas. And this is actually only found in Llano, Texas. And you probably can't see it well, but there's that what looks pretty dark. It's almost bluish in the right light. That's actually a bluish form of quartz, which it has very little bits of rutile in it, which is a titanium dioxide, and that gives it a bluish color. And so that's one of the cooler rocks I found in Texas. And then, for example, here from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan is some copper ore. Actually, it might catch the light. You can see some of these kind of copper colored things. This is copper ore from Michigan, the Upper Peninsula. So those are some of the cool rocks I found. But really, there's just a lot of the different types of rocks like granites, basalts. As I've been across in my travels, I found really a lot of different types of rocks.
Alberto is curious, where do you think is the best place to collect pretty rock specimens?
That's partly going to depend on what you're looking for. So if you're looking for rocks like maybe those lepidolites and things like that, you're going to want to go to places with generally with where you can find igneous rocks if you want to find pegmatites. And many of those are found and a lot of those are found in the Western US. There's a lot of good exposures of rocks out there. But in Florida, for instance, we have a lot of interesting fossils. That's a cool feature that we find in Florida. So you could go down to your creek and find some shark's teeth, for instance, or things like that. Or you find, if you look at really a lot of the limestone boulders around, you can see different bivalves, different mollusks. So the sea creatures from when Florida was kind of covered by a shallow sea, and it was very much like the Bahamas are today. So if you want fossils, Florida's a great place, and you can find fossils in a number of different places throughout the United States, mostly in sedimentary rocks. So if you're looking for ancient life and fossils, you want to look for sedimentary rocks. But if you're looking for more of the minerals and kind of neatly colored large crystals, things of that nature, you'd want to go more towards the igneous rocks in the United States, which a lot of those you can find in the Western US, because that's been more geologically active more recently than the Eastern United States. So it all depends.
I'm sorry. Colin asks, how do you know how old a rock is?
So there's a number of different ways. And so so we saw that when I showed the geologic time scale. So that's kind of a representation of time and how it's been named and subdivided by geologists over really hundreds of years, since it's the culmination of a lot of work. And so there's really two kind of things to take away. One is you can date things relatively, where you can say, okay, well, some rocks got the rocks at the bottom of these layers, the rocks at the bottom got laid down first, and then they got covered by subsequent rocks. So that's relative dating. So the rocks at the bottom are oldest, and the rocks at the top are the youngest. And then if you look at, say, maybe some fossils throughout that sequence, you could tell how, and then you go to somewhere else, you could say maybe how old relatively the rocks are. Then the other way of dating is absolute dating. And so the way that geologists do that is we look at different minerals that inside rocks. So those minerals, some of them are radioactive, and so they decay away from some unstable form, like maybe uranium. So it's very energetic, and it decays away and at the end, it goes all the way from uranium down to lead. And so looking at how much uranium has decayed to lead, for instance, in a rock, so looking at radioactive decay in rocks allows us an absolute chronometer. We can give it, this rock is this many this many hundreds of millions or tens of millions or millions of years old. And so the two types of ways we tell how rocks are is we look at relative dating and absolute dating.
Joe is curious, what do you do with the samples you take out of rocks from the earlier slide when you were drilling?
We take those samples. So this is actually this is a sample from some basalts. So a very iron-rich mafic rock so this igneous rock that squeezes up out of the mantle. This is from Antarctica actually. And so we take those and we trim them so they're these nice standard size cylinders. And then what I do specifically is I measure the magnetic field that these rocks recorded. So the iron in these rocks, like magnetite, like iron oxides, these iron oxides, they can really remember what the Earth's magnetic field was like as they formed. So as they cool down, they lock in the Earth's magnetic field. And so from the arrangement of the Earth's magnetic field, then we can tell where on the surface of the Earth that rock was. And so then you can if you look at that throughout time, you can end up tracing the path of that rock and the continent it was on. And so that's a lot of what my research is about. And so you can tell that it's important then not only where the rock was, but also when it was there. So that's where, say, dating the rock and trying to figure out when the absolute date of that rock becomes important. So it's all kind of it's very interdisciplinary in trying to get as much information out of these rocks as possible.
Claudia asks, can fossils in rocks disappear in volcanoes erupting?
Can fossils disappear in volcanoes erupting? Yeah, so that's I talked about we want to find fossils in sedimentary rocks, and another key caveat is another important thing is that you don't want the sedimentary rocks to have been cooked too much by, say, a volcano erupting, making them really hot, or squeezed too much by getting rocks buried on top of them, because that can destroy fossils. Yeah, so if you have enough heat and pressure, and a volcano erupting would provide a lot of heat, you can it's called metamorphose. You can change those rock and alter it enough that the fossils become unrecognizable or really absent.
Emma asks, how does a rock make a cube shape like we saw earlier?
So the mineral, like that pyrite, so it's the arrangement of the atoms, of the iron and sulfur atoms. So how those bond to each other, they tend to bond to each other in these cube shapes. And so it really all comes down from the very from the very, very smallest pieces from these very, very small pieces of matter, from the atoms themselves. They like to arrange themselves in these cubes. And then as you get more and more of those cubes forming, it can turn into something that we can actually see, which is really fascinating to me, because it's very hard to see. It's impossible for us to just naturally look at this rock and be like, oh, this is made up of atoms, like a lot of empty space. I can't like poke my finger through it. But the way that those atoms bond together can create large enough minerals for us to see that cube shape, that way they bond together with our eyes, which is one of the things which I found fascinating about geology, is being able to it's a discipline, it's a scientific field where a lot of the times you can see what you're interested in, rather than it being a little harder to see.
Holly is curious, what's the best way to tell the difference between a metamorphic rock and an igneous rock?
So one of the ways is that, this is actually this is an igneous rock. This lawnite is an igneous rock. And this schist from New Mexico is a metamorphic rock. So one of the ways igneous, metamorphic. And so one of the ways you can see this layering in the metamorphic rock. So one of the ways as things get metamorphosed, they tend to get layered as they get squeezed and heated and squeezed. and new minerals form. So you want to look at the minerals in the rock are going to tell you. So a lot of these, so all these micas forming in sheets is one of the ways I could tell this is a metamorphic rock. And then you can see, actually, you might be able to see these darker minerals, these kind of elongate ones. Those are storolites. And so that's another mineral that forms as rocks get metamorphosed. So the way, and then you look at this rock and you see that there's really no layering to it, right? It's just kind of all these minerals grew as the rock cooled, and it didn't get squeezed or heated afterwards. So that's one of the ways you can tell the difference between an igneous and a metamorphic rock.
We have time for just a few more questions. Next, we have Hannah, who asks, what type of rock is a geode? Is it a rock?
I would say it's a rock. I have a very inclusive definition of rocks. But so geodes are going to form in kind of this, they're going to form in the interior of, if you have this, say, some open space, and as minerals precipitate in that open space or some void in the rock, and then later you can crack it open, you find, like, some generally very beautiful crystals because they have so much space to grow. And so the geodes are generally in rock, so they're more of that space where minerals have grown, have precipitated out inside a rock. So I'd say geodes are in rocks, and yeah, they're rocks too.
Samantha's wondering, what are some of the most important things that people can learn from rocks?
So I think one of the things that I find fascinating about Earth history is that Earth is, we look at a map, say, on the wall, we look at the arrangement of continents, we go outside and we see how warm it is, and how warm it is, if it's, and things, and the climate, for instance. And the thing is that all of these things, even, the arrangement of the continents has drastically changed throughout all of Earth history. And so looking at different rocks and putting together all that knowledge that we can gain from, say, where a rock was, we can see that the Earth has changed a lot. The arrangement of continents has changed a lot. The continents all used to be together. You've probably heard of Pangaea and a supercontinent. But Pangaea was only the most recent supercontinent. There's been others at different times throughout Earth history. And so the continents have moved all over, Earth's climate has changed drastically at different times. And so by looking at rocks, we can understand that Earth has been a very different planet throughout all of the billions of years of its history. And so getting at that history, seeing how things have changed, and how we can understand maybe the future of Earth from the past, and how we can understand the present of Earth from its past is really interesting to me. So I think that's the interesting thing which we can learn from rocks, is that they're the book of Earth history that we can crack open the pages of and read.
And we'll wrap up with one final question from Rick. He asks, does pillow basalt form in freshwater conditions?
Yeah, so pillow basalt that's going to form. So it's an igneous rock. So as it's squeezing out, if this hot lava squeezes out into water, it tends to form these structures called pillows, because they look, geologists are very descriptive. And so since they look somewhat like pillows, it's called pillow basalt. So you get all these kind of lumps of rock all together. And so the important thing is that the lava is squeezing out into water. It doesn't necessarily matter if it's fresh or salt water. That's not going to be the biggest thing on it. It's mostly the fact that it's coming up underwater to begin with. So yeah, in rivers or lakes, if some basalt squeezed out into that underwater there, you could form pillow basalts there.
Awesome, Tony. Thank you so much. Is there anything you would like to say to our attendees today before we wrap up?
I guess I just want to reiterate, geology is a big realm of science, right? I look at rocks, I look at the magnets in rocks. So I do something very specific in geology, but there's a lot of different disciplines. Some people look at ancient life, they look at fossils. Other people look at maybe hydrogeology, they look at water. Some people look at ancient climates. There's a lot of different things you can do in geology, which is why we're earth scientists, right? We look at the earth. Geology is the study of earth, geo. And so I just want to kind of reiterate that there's a lot of different things. I myself am fascinated by rocks, but there's a lot of different avenues of geology, and that I just encourage you to find what's science is a great way of looking at, it's a way of looking at the world, right? It's a process of of asking questions and answering them. And anyone can do it. And I kind of encourage all the people watching to try to apply that to their own life, to apply that scientific method, ask questions and try to systematically answer them. And thank you for listening to me and coming online. And I really enjoyed all your questions. And yeah, thanks for being here.
Thank you so much, Tony. At this point, I'm going to hand things over to Stephanie for some closing remarks.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much. We want to thank everyone for joining us on the call today, particularly to learn about geology and rocks, and a special thanks to Dr. Anthony Pivarunas from the University of Florida for connecting with us today. Once again, our Friday Q&As with the scientists take place weekly at 3 p.m. as part of a collaboration between scientists in every Florida school and the Community Scholars Initiative. You can learn more about our guests as well as each of our programs by visiting the websites you see on your screen. You'll find a recording of today's program on the UF Thompson Earth Systems YouTube channel, along with great resources that we've curated on the topic of geology for you. Please be sure to register for next Friday's Q&A, where we'll investigate a beehive to learn more about bees. Thank you, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.